Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Mercedes have revealed they understand the major setup flaws which compromised their weekend for a nightmarish Brazil, expecting to be back to some decent form for the Las Vegas Grand Prix this weekend. George Russell also says Mercedes are very confident, they know what's gone wrong for the last couple of years and can correct it with their next year's design to not stumble at the first hurdle yet again. Will they get P2 in the Constructors by the end of this season? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Before we begin, if you love Formula 1 like I do, you probably missed the phenomenal V10 engine noises and just appreciate great audio in general. I'm the same, and I was looking for a great pair of earphones for a long time to listen to races when I'm out and about and just to music and all this type of stuff, and I finally found them when Status Audio sent me the Between 3 ANCs. These are a phenomenal set of earbuds, the best I've ever used by far. Of course, they've got active noise cancellation up to 38 decibels. The battery life on these is mega. 12 hours with no ANC on, 8 hours with it on, 36 hours additionally in the charging case that comes with it. But as a bit of an audiophile, my favourite part about it is to play around with things on the app. The bass, especially on these, is very good, and you can customise for those that know Call of Duty out there, the equalisation, go through everything, make the bass better, play around with the different sound modes. Phenomenal for music, for listening to races when I've been out and about wearing these for the last couple of weeks, and for all your audio needs. If you're in the market for a new pair of earbuds, use the link in the description box below. Code F1 News will get you 10% off at checkout. Thanks to Status Audio for sponsoring the video. Let's crack right on with things. This is potentially the Las Vegas Grand Prix because it could be absolute chaos this weekend. Turn 1 might be a shambles, no grip on the tyres, freezing cold temperatures, and people were even looking today at this footage. This was from earlier this year sometime when they did, you guys might remember this, when they came out in an old Mercedes but painted silver, and you got the underfloor lighting, all this stuff, and they did a bit of a test run where they announced the whole thing just to hype it up, you know, marketing, all that good stuff. This was footage though of George Russell. I'm pretty sure this is Russell sliding out of this corner, and this is a tale of things potentially to come. He almost hits the barriers there. I'm pretty sure that was Russell anyway, and that has raised serious questions about whether there is going to be no grip on this track with no feeder series, no other motorsports going on. The track itself is going to be very slippery. The temperatures are very cold compared to most Grand Prix. Apparently it's going to get down to 12 degrees in the race, which isn't freezing, but it's not too far away. And you also got, I think these engines are running flat out for a very long time in the way this track circuit is set up. The tyres are not going to be particularly in the temperature window when they come out of the pits. The track temperature is going to be very cool. There's even a chance of showers on Friday night, which is qualifying time, and Saturday daytime. You guys remember it's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday weekend with the race on Saturday night, practice on the Thursday, and then qualifying on Friday night. And if there is showers, then any rubber on the track over the first couple of days is going to get wiped away before the Grand Prix and potentially before qualifying. It could be complete chaos with the way the pit exit works, the cool temperatures. It's got the, potential to be an absolute disaster class. I don't really know whether when they put this on, they thought, because they didn't have to do it on Saturday night at like 1 a.m. At least Eastern time, 1 a.m. I think it's 10 p.m. local time. But maybe they just thought, oh, desert equals hot. That's not necessarily how it works. And Mario Isola from Pirelli says, yep, it's a step into the unknown for everybody. And Mercedes say, well, it's going to be a very high-speed track with wing levels, something like Spa or Monza. So, yeah, obviously it's going to be a high-speed track. Maybe Williams are getting ready to go for this weekend, looking to get some points because their 7th place is at some risk with AlphaTauri making a big progression over the last couple of races. Temperatures expected by Mercedes to be in the single digits. Apparently the FIA say it's going to be slightly warmer than that, but honestly, who knows? Getting the tyres to work is going to be, let's say there's a red flag restart or a safety car restart near the end of the Grand Prix, worn tyres, going into turn 1 at like 1 a.m. when it's freezing cold. Like, there's going to be crashes. There's got to be this weekend. And, okay, Max is going to win, but, it's going to be interesting as much as it might be a complete shambles. Now, Mercedes are hoping that what afflicted them badly in Brazil will not return again. It was an absolute nightmare for Mercedes. Toto Wolff said it's his worst weekend at Mercedes. And they had to figure out what went wrong because their car was very much working in Austin with a new floor upgrade, and maybe it was illegal because it was too close to the floor. So people thought, well, How much time did they gain by that flaw, indiscretion? We didn't really know. Then they went to Mexico and still were very good, at least in the hands of Hamilton. And the car that weekend was deemed legal. So clearly the car with the new full upgrade has some pace, not as much as the Red Bull, but there's some pace in the car. But Brazil, a circuit that should have been great for them, was a disaster. Mainly on the tyre wear side, their rear tyres were getting cooked. They tried to make some changes, whatever they could change on the Parc Fermé, front wing, tyre pressures, stuff like this. They tried to tweak a few things. It helped their car not destroy the rear tyres so much, but then they had all sorts of understeer into the corners. So it was a nightmare weekend. They eventually only got, 4 points was it from Hamilton in P8 in the end. Russell DNF'd after his engine gave up the ghost towards the end of the Grand Prix. But Mercedes believe they understand what went wrong. As Toto Wolff says here in the kind of preview for Las Vegas, Brazil was probably our most difficult weekend of the season. We didn't perform at our best. We have been hard at work to identify the wrong turn we took with this setup. We have done that. So, confirming, I guess, to Mercedes that it was a setup related issue, not a flaw with the car, shall we say, because I think it's quite clear that the full upgrade worked, and going into the weekend, Andrew Chauvelin was saying that, the full upgrade that we brought correlates exactly with the wind tunnel data, which is something that Mercedes don't often say. And then, of course, in classic Mercedes fashion over the last couple of years, they big themselves up and then immediately have an absolute nightmare, which is what happened in Brazil. But Toto Wolff confirming that it was a setup-related issue that they got wrong. But there was also talk during the weekend that Mercedes, it wasn't an easy identification, it seems, because Mercedes said going into the race that they considered breaking Parc Fermé, changing the setup for the Grand Prix and, starting for the pit lane. But they said that even if they did that, they wouldn't have known what to change. So they decided that it really wasn't worth it to do so. So it clearly wasn't an easy identification for Mercedes to figure out what in their setup went wrong, but it was clearly something, and probably something quite useful. As like we said the other day, last year's Brazil was a great weekend at the time, but it proved to be a bad weekend in the sense that Mercedes stuck with the zero pods and stuck with the same mechanical concept, which has now come back to bite them. This terrible weekend for Mercedes might say to them, okay, well, that was wrong. That's going to be important information for next year's car. We understand our mistakes and can explain our performance loss to the field. That's important as we look to secure P2 in the constructors. So, doesn't go into detail on what the setup mistake was. I imagine that he doesn't want to allow that information public, at least for now. I imagine he'll get quizzed on this going into the upcoming weekends. But, it's interesting that he says what they found explains their performance delta. Now, of course, it's Toto Wolff saying something for the media, so of course you've got to wonder to some degree whether they fully understand the situation. Then he goes on to say that they've got to prepare for the racing at Las Vegas, difficult circuit, difficult characteristics, but limited information. The temperatures will be cold and that will cause some problems. Now, Russell also has commented on similar things, talking mainly about next year's car and the fact that he insists that Mercedes will not be stumbling at the first hurdle, as it were. The first hurdle really both seasons has been Bahrain. They've turned up to Bahrain, even Bahrain testing the last 2 years. Their car hasn't really delivered at all, especially Bahrain testing this year. It was clear from day one, at least within the Mercedes garage, that this car was not up to scratch. So, Russell actually talks about this and says that as soon as we hit the track in Bahrain, we knew we'd taken the wrong direction. Going into the third year now, I'm confident we're not going to make those same mistakes. I'm confident we've got some good gains over this winter that we're finding at the moment, but it's a relative game and we don't know what our rivals are going to bring. We apparently know what Red Bull might bring, and it might be something pretty radical. And I think Mercedes and the competition will hope to, they'll have to hope that just fails, because if Red Bull actually bring radical upgrades and they work, I think there realistically is no chance for the next couple of years. But some interesting statements here from Russell. Okay, there's a lot in this article. I'll link it down below for you guys as always, but I'll just go through some of the highlights, because he does mention that last year's car, the W13, was a trickier car to drive, at least for him. I don't know if Hamilton feels the same way, but he quite possibly does. I mean, let's be honest, the W13 for the first part of the season was destroying their spines. It was an absolute disaster, right? Because it was bouncing through the corners. That was a serious issue. It's not like this year's car has been easy to drive, but he does say that they've made some improvements, which might be true, but let's be honest, the W14 was considerably slower over a stint at Brazil than the W13 was. Now, maybe if they get it set up right, that's a different story. But I thought this is interesting also. It's definitely a very different car this year than it was last year aerodynamically, but mechanically, it is still very much the same car, and the trends seem to be similar, i.e., they're good and bad at the same circuit. So clearly Mercedes fails to understand going into this season, 2023, that it wasn't Red Bull's aero that necessarily that was giving them the major edge. It was more so their mechanical platform, their suspension. And this was, Adrian Newey has said that pretty much all he worked on for the design of the RB18 initially was the suspension design. He knew that getting that right was critical to making the car work. And even going into this season, Mercedes apparently didn't fully grasp that, and mechanically, from a suspension setup, chassis, homologation perspective, have a car that's not that dissimilar, right? The zero pod design forced their hand on that, and the fact that they've had to go back on that mid-season, it's still underneath the bodywork. It's still the same car that it was at the start of the year, which is fundamentally flawed. So 12 months on, 12 months further information, direction, we've managed to implement these changes. They work as anticipated, which is what Chauvelin said the other day. But he says they're now being far more thorough going into next season, looking at potential consequences. Last year, we were trying so many different things. It was more like quantity over quality testing last year. This year, we've nailed down the direction we want to move in, and, therefore, they can be more precise. Going on to say that I think and I hope that we're not caught out by anything going into next year. This doesn't mean we're going to have the fastest car on the grid, but I don't think we're going to stumble at the first hurdle. We now have 2 more years worth of learning in the tank. So we'll see, because Russell said quite a lot over the last couple of years. I think it was in February when he said that they're making more gains in the wind tunnel then than they were in the last couple of years. And to be fair, maybe the gains they made in the wind tunnel back in, I think it was maybe March, April actually, he said that after the first couple of races, that maybe those aren't changes that they can realistically apply to this car, because under the cost cap, they don't have the money to just make a new chassis that Toto Wolff said that they would have done in previous seasons if the cost cap was not a thing. So do you buy the fact that Mercedes understand their problems from Brazil, and they also understand exactly what to change going into next year? They certainly need to, right? Hamilton makes it very clear that the next 6 months, this was said back in September now, need to be the best 6 months of development they've ever had if they want to win. And to be honest, right, even though typically Mercedes have good in-season development and have done, their car has improved, they've brought upgrades, right, they've done quite a lot to the car, Hamilton is only 4th in terms of points scored since the summer break. I mean, Lando Norris has had 126 points over the last several races, which is only second to Max Verstappen, with even Carlos Sainz ahead of Hamilton as well. And Russell doesn't even make the top 6, with Perez and Leclerc 5th and 6th respectively. So, last year this is a different story really, when Mercedes the second half did score a fair few points. You've got to give credit to McLaren, and to be fair, Ferrari, they understand their car a little bit more, with Max dominating. The discrepancy between Max and Checo is actually kind of outrageous as well, really, to think about. But Mercedes will definitely have to find massive strides, because just to look at the championship gaps for the year of, what they consider to be Mercedes dominance, all of those championships were not won by that many points, especially compared to some of the rivals. Now, sure, Hamilton-Bottas 2020, Hamilton-Bottas 2019, okay, those seasons were less competitive, and it was kind of clear that Hamilton was going to get the win. But at least in the Ferrari seasons, there was a competitor within a reasonable points discrepancy. This year, of course, it's a slightly different story, and even with Perez being this far back, it's kind of wild, as with Perez this far behind, nobody is even in front of Perez. Now, it could nearly be Hamilton. Of course, a lot of that has to go down to the dominance of Verstappen, but, a big step is clearly needed based on this evidence if anyone actually wants to catch Red Bull next year. Just before we close out, though, this was an interesting rumour going around about Mike Elliott. We saw last week that Mike Elliott confirmed that he had retired from Mercedes and decided no longer to continue with them. Now, he was their technical director, who was effectively fired from that role, or let's just say promoted/demoted. He became the CTO, which is technically a promotion, but the reality is that they kicked him off that role and brought James Allison back in, because Mike Elliott, it wasn't working out from either a leadership standpoint or just he'd overseen the development of the zero pods, and that hadn't necessarily worked. So he then leaves, and Mercedes say, oh no, it's amicable, Mike decided to leave and it was his own decision and all of this type of stuff. He wasn't fired, definitely not, and you know how it goes. But now we're hearing him linked to other teams. So to be fair, it's quite possible that Mike Elliott did leave of his own accord, simply because he didn't want to work in a CTO role. He actually wants to be a technical director again for another team. Now, of course, we don't know what that would involve, and the current rumour doesn't necessarily indicate what role he might play at another team. But if he is rumoured to join Alpine, which apparently he potentially is, potentially even bringing reserve driver Mick Schumacher with him, which would be very interesting and would align a little bit, because, Mick recently tested with Alpine's WEC, World Endurance Endurance Championship Series. And if you can't get a Formula 1 seat, might well drive in the WEC going forwards, which might make sense. So does it also make sense to send Mike Elliott as well to do some role at Alpine? Possibly, yes. But if this is the case, when his gardening leave, I imagine, ends at Mercedes, because they, I don't think, would allow him to go to another team immediately and potentially bring ideas from the Mercedes project, kind of implies to me that Elliott has not exactly stepped away and saying, I don't want to do this anymore, let me give it a couple of years off. Sounds more like he was forced out, just, reading between the lines a little bit, if he does go on to join another team very shortly afterwards. But of course, that might not be true at all. Very much intrigued to your thoughts and speculation in the comment section below. And just one final thing here that was spotted actually at the Red Bull factory or wherever it is. The Hungarian Grand Prix trophy that Lando Norris broke on the podium for Max Verstappen is actually being displayed, which is kind of cool stuff, right? And I know that he got a new one made, but the reality is this trophy will be more famous and recognizable as a result. Like in 20 years time, when, or even longer than that, when someone goes to the Red Bull factory and sees this, they, it's a trophy from a relatively boring season of Formula 1 where it was a runaway World Drivers and World Constructors Championship, but this trophy will live on in the memory as, a big storyline, especially if in future years Norris and Verstappen come to blows, let's say they're in the same team or in different teams and they actually have title fights between each other. This will be no doubt a pretty memorable piece of history. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks to Status Audio for sponsoring the video. Link in the description and in the pinned comment. F1 News, code 10% off. You guys know the drill. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care of yourselves. And I'll see you next time.